team a number of years before, and she was living in Nashville pursuing a career as a singer and a songwriter. And so we went to hear her sing. She was playing at a bar in Nashville. And so after her set, she invited me to come up, and I played a few songs, played a couple love songs and a song about loneliness and singleness, because that was where I'd just come from, right? Was that kind of phase of life. But then at the end, Ruth was her name, she came back up, and she sang with me. We sang a worship song that we had done in Boston, a song called Surely the Lord, and it's based on Psalm. I can't even remember now which psalm it's based on, but the psalm says, the chorus of the song says, "Surely the Lord is my salvation. Surely the Lord is my salvation. He is my strength. He is my song." Something like "Call on His great name." I actually wrote the song, but I can't even remember how it goes. Surely the Lord is my salvation. He is my strength. He is my song. Whatever. It was a worship song about praising God and acknowledging our need for Him. And we're singing this worship song, and it was interesting to see how people in the bar responded. A number of them stopped what they were doing, whether it was hitting on the girl next to them, or they stopped, put down their fourth or fifth beer or whatever it was that they were doing, and they turned and they just listened. And a number of them, you could see this look, there was a perplexing look on their face, but for some of them, I saw this calm coming over their faces. And I had an opportunity to talk with a number of them after them. They're all like, "Yeah, I love going to church. I love church." It was really interesting getting into this conversation. But while we were singing a song, for a moment, it was almost as if that bar had become a church. Today we are continuing in our series on the book of Acts called Living as Missionaries. And the central thesis of this whole series is that being a missionary is not a special breed of Christian. It's not for the super Christians or something like that. I think a lot of you, maybe you're like my mom. My mom, I think she always would have wanted to be a missionary, but she always thought that meant that she would have to go and live somewhere where the bugs were really big and it was 103 degrees all the time. And she just wasn't cut out for that. Now, this is sort of our perception that to be a missionary, you've got to go to some wild, exotic place. But what we want to see here is that that's really not necessary, that God is calling each and every one of us to live as missionaries right where we are. I mean, honestly, coming from Wyoming, New Jersey's pretty exotic, so I kind of feel like I've made that big exotic leap. But we're all called, no matter where we are, no matter where we live, God calls us to live as missionaries right where we are. And so the question, which I think this passage answers for us this morning, is the question of what is the greatest tool in our missionary belt? What is the greatest tool that we have in terms of our ability to engage those around us and to draw them into the truth of the gospel? What is the greatest missionary tool in our belt? And I think we could say a lot. There could be a lot of different things. We might say, well, it's the power of our rhetoric. It's the power of our rhetoric. It's the power of our ability to explain the gospel, right? It's the power of our ability to defend the gospel and to explain it in different contexts. And we've been talking about the importance of that. We see throughout the book of Acts that this is what's going on. Peter and Paul, that they are explaining the gospel in different contexts and in different ways, and they're defending the gospel in different ways. And so we might think, yeah, that's it. It's the power of our rhetoric. It's our ability to explain the gospel and to defend it. I think that's a part of it, but I think this passage presses us to think that it's deeper than that. It's deeper and bigger than that. We might say that maybe the greatest tool in our missionary belt is the power of our marketing, right? It's the power of our marketing. It's how well can we, how well can we get the word out about our church, and what strategies can we use, with the internet, and maybe we should focus in on Facebook. How can we use Facebook better, and search engine optimization, and how can we use newspaper and send out flyers, or that certainly can be a part of it as well. That can be a part of it as well. But I think this passage encourages us to see it's bigger. It's bigger than that. It's deeper than that. Maybe it's the power. Greatest tool in our missionary belt is the power of our political power, right? Our ability to influence the laws that are passed and to influence them in ways that reflect biblical principles. And I think that's good too. That reflects a holistic understanding of what the gospel is all about. But I think this passage sort of presses a little bit deeper because there's problems with all of those different aspects or different ways in which we can approach it. We have to be careful of. If we focus just on the power of our rhetoric, sometimes we can come across as if we know all the answers. Like we get to understand the Bible and the gospel so well that, man, any question you got, you just come to me on the Bible answer, man, I got it. And I think that actually sometimes, a lot of us are afraid of sharing our faith because we're afraid we won't have the answers. But sometimes I think we can have the opposite problem, that if we sound like we have too many answers, people get very suspicious of that. It can kind of come across as an overconfidence. So we got to be careful of that if we emphasize too much the power of our rhetoric. What about the power of our marketing? Well, again, I think that can be used, right? God can use anything, and those are important ways of letting people know about what's going on, and there are appropriate ways to do that. But we also have to be careful. We have to be careful that because if we don't approach it in the right way, I think that for some people it can seem like we're just kind of selling something like anybody else would be selling something. And so then before you know it, a Good Friday service doesn't seem a whole lot different than a Black Friday sale. So we got to be careful about how we do that and we approach that. So there's dangers there. There's dangers. We can use it, but there's dangers there as well. And then the power of our politics, our political power. Well, again, there's an appropriate place for that, but I think we can also learn a lesson from ancient Israel, and that is that it doesn't really matter if you write the laws on stone tablets if they're not being written on people's hearts. So what is it? What is the greatest tool in our missionary belt? And I think that what we find right here is that the greatest tool in our missionary belt is the life of our community itself. The greatest tool in our missionary belt is the life of our community itself. What we see here in this passage is a snapshot of the early Christian community. It's interesting. Up until this point, for the most part, the book of Acts, the first 2 chapters, have pretty much just been a narrative. It's just been telling a story. It's been looking at certain events and telling these events as they occurred. Here, Luke kind of pulls back and just kind of generalizes about what was going on in the Christian community. It gives us sort of a snapshot of it. It gives us a snapshot of the community. And what do we see? Well, the last verse, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. It seems like there was something about that community, something about the life of the community that was a magnet that was drawing people in. What was it? What was it about the life of the community that was drawing people in? Well, first of all, one of the things that I think we see in this passage is that people noticed that this Christian community thing, it wasn't all about religion. It wasn't just about religion. Now, certainly, they of course, they went to the temple courts and they prayed. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Certainly, that was there. But what you notice in this passage more than anything is that they were simply living life together. They were just doing life together. In fact, the word "together" occurs 5 times, I think, just in these verses. They were just together. They were eating together, right? They were sharing meals together. They had fellowship together. They were watching football together. Well, probably not football, but they were just hanging out. They were just together. They were being generous with one another and sharing what they had, right? They were just doing life together. And so there was this weird thing where it seemed in some respects void of religion. What's interesting is that in the Roman culture, when they looked at the early Christians, the Christians were known as atheists. They thought the Christians were atheists because it seemed like there was nothing religious about them. All of the things that typically were involved in Roman religion seemed to be absent from the Christians. For one thing, they didn't have their own building. They didn't have a building. They'd go to the temple courts, but they didn't have their own building. They didn't